Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. Today I want to do something a little bit different and talk about how I personally think about music. I'm a huge fan of structure, so I thought I'd delve into some of my mental models on one of the most nebulous topics in theory, modality. This word gets used to describe a lot of different but related ideas, but in the broadest possible terms, it's basically the overall structure of a scale. Like, is this scale more like this one? Or this one? I think most people would say the former, but in both cases we've just changed one note, so why? Well, the version they teach you in Theory 1 goes something like this. The third degree of the scale is the primary modal note, and its quality tells you the modality of the scale. If it's a major third, you've got a major scale, and if it's minor, well, you can probably figure it out. This is sometimes combined with a sixth, which is the secondary modal note, although they don't tend to tell you what happens when the two notes disagree. But that's a little bit too simple for my taste, so I've developed what I like to call the Triforce of modality. Quick caveat, I'm not claiming that any of this is my original work. I've never seen it put together in exactly this way, but all the parts of it are pretty well known in the theory world. Also, I'm gonna be focusing on traditional 7-note scales. The model works on others, but it takes some adapting, and I just want to get the basic ideas across. Anyway, this model can work either as an analytical tool to break down a scale you've already got, or as a generative tool. Each part contains a set of building blocks you can use to put together scales you might never have considered, and they're pretty handy for exploring the possibility space if you find yourself getting bored with the normal options. The first method is what I like to call melodic modality. This is what you'd expect to find by walking up and down the scale, and it can be represented by a series of steps. For instance, any theory student can tell you that the major scale is built by picking a root, then going up a whole step, then another whole step, then a half step, then whole, and finally half. This pattern is literally burned into my brain, and it serves as a good introduction to this idea. By default, a 7-note scale has 5 whole steps and 2 half steps, and the way those are arranged is the core of melodic modality. The whole steps don't really do that much. They sound pretty neutral, and also there's just a lot of them. They're mainly filling the gaps between the half steps, which sound a lot more distinctive and really control the identity of the scale. This is partly based on their position above the root, but I think more important is their position relative to each other. In the major scale, they're about as spaced out as you can get. They've got 2 whole steps between them on one side and 3 on the other. This spreads out their dissonance and mellows the scale a bit. If we move them closer, we might get something like this, where we see this little cluster in the middle creating a bit more confusion. But of course, not all scales are that straightforward. For instance, harmonic minor has an augmented second between 2 of its scale degrees. It gets away with this by also adding in a third half step, leaving us with just 3 whole steps and giving the scale a really complex sound. You could even make a scale with 2 augmented seconds, or even a double augmented second, as long as you compensate for the added distance by shrinking some of your other steps to match. I like to think of this process as mutation, and the further you've mutated from the initial 5-2 setup, the more alien it's likely to sound. You can even mutate up a scale with no whole steps at all, if you want something that sounds really, really weird. Next up is harmonic modality. This, as the name implies, is based on the harmony. Specifically, it's based on what are called primary triads, that is, the most important chords in the scale. Traditionally, these are the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord, and if you know the qualities of all 3, you can generate the entire scale. Check this out. We start with a root. This is just a fixed arbitrary point, so let's go with A. The root of the scale is also the root of our 1 chord, so if we know our 1 chord is major, that tells us what the other chord tones are. C sharp, the 3rd, and E the 5th. Now we know the root of our 5 chord, and if that's major too, then we get 2 new notes, G sharp, the 7th degree of the scale, and B, the 2nd. We don't have the root of our 4 chord yet, but we can find it. The construction of the 4 chord contains the root of the scale, and since we know what that is, we can just work backwards from that to find our last 2 notes. If our 4 chord is also major, that gives us F sharp, the 6th degree, and D, the 4th, and voila, we have the entire A major scale. And you can do this with any set of chords you want. Let's say you wanted to build natural minor. That's 1 minor, 4 minor, 5 minor. How about harmonic minor? That's 1 minor, 4 minor, 5 major. You can even add in weirder chord qualities. If we take 1 diminished, 4 minor, and 5 augmented, we get this, which is called Locrian natural 9. We could even use 1 minor, 5 major, and 4 sus4, which gives us this scale, which, looking it up, appears to be an Indian Carnatic raga called Varuna Priya, although, of course, directly comparing Western scales to Indian ragas is dangerous to say the least. Harmonic modality, by the way, is where I think the idea of the 3rd and 6th as modal notes comes from. Those notes define the qualities of the 1 and 4 chords respectively, and since the 5 chord is traditionally always major, those 2 were the ones that changed between major and minor keys. This approach is a little more rigorous than melodic modality because it's literally just picking 3 chord qualities and seeing what spills out, and again, it's a great way to find scales you might never have considered. I mean, I'd never seen Varuna Priya before making this video. Anyway, the last method is what I call chord scale modality, which looks at how the notes of the scale relate to its underlying harmony. This approach breaks the notes into two groups. The first is the chord tones, which are the notes that are part of the scale's harmonic identity. Traditionally, this is the root, third, fifth, and seventh, although some scales break that. These give the scale its overall quality. If they create a major 7 chord, for instance, you've got a major scale. If they make a dominant 7, it's a dominant scale, and so on. The other group is the tensions, short for chord extensions, which comprise the rest of the notes. These are traditionally the 2nd, 4th, and 6th degrees, although to differentiate them from the chord tones, they're often called the 9th, 11th, and 13th instead, for reasons that aren't really worth diving into since this video's already getting a little long. These give the scale its specific color, and again, this largely comes down to half steps. Here, what matters is how far away the tensions are from the nearest chord tones. This gets a bit fuzzy, but a good rule of thumb is that tensions a half step above a chord tone sound the harshest and should generally be avoided, tensions a half step below a chord tone sound a little rough and should be used with caution, and tensions a whole step away from both sides sound relaxed and can be used freely. Plus, there's some extra dissonance if your tension is a tritone away from a chord tone. For construction purposes, I tend to refer to the tensions by comparison to the modes, which, if you're not familiar, we've talked about in previous videos. For instance, if we took a major 7 chord and added in the tensions from the Phrygian mode, we'd wind up with Phrygian major, while combining a dominant 7th chord with the tensions from Lydian gives us Lydian dominant. To build your own scale like this, all you have to do is pick a 7th chord and then place the tensions next to them in order to create your desired level of dissonance. So yeah, whether you think of the major scale like this, or this, that's a glimpse into how I look at modality. I'm sure y'all have your own thoughts on the subject, so please, let me know in the comments. Anyway, thanks for watching and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of our upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.